A couple of weeks ago I gave a teisho on comparing the Tao with Zen. And of course there's a lot of material there. Some have said, and I think I agree, as I mentioned in the teisho, that you wouldn't have Zen without the Tao from Buddhism. It wouldn't have developed into Zen. Be that as it may, I'd like to try another correspondence, another comparison today, to see some similarities between Zen and Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition. Some of you know I began learning really about that many years ago through my yoga teacher of all people, who did a wonderful correspondence between the chakras, the energy centers in Hinduism, which don't appear so much in Zen, but certainly they do in Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana. Between them and the Sephiroth, the energy centers in the Sephirotic tree, the basic construction of the universe and of the human person, and all those correspondences, as above, so below, as within, so without. I'd like to do some comparison here. The Kabbalah, it's very complicated, and there's lots of stuff that's indecipherable out there. The book I've always used, and which I recommend if you're at all interested, called The Kabbalah, Tradition of Hidden Knowledge by Zev Ben Shimon Halavi. It's accessible and profound at the same time. It's a wonderful initiation. So, I'd like to use, some of the notions in popular Zen to show comparison with the Kabbalah. I think the fundamental insight in terms of cosmology and the architecture of the psyche and all of those things of the Kabbalah is the fourfold level of consciousness and being. And what's interesting about it is that these levels are interlap, they overlap and they intertwine. So they're linked into each other like links on a chain. There's actually a picture of it here on the front, and others like this. So you can see it's like a I like to call it a metaphysical DNA, spiritual DNA. It's like the double helix, with the different centers intertwined there. And it has different colors as the four rise up. And I just like to make a comparison, first of all, with these levels and describing them with the couple of the most important bodhisattvas in the Zen tradition. And you start on the level of body, earth, the level of Asiya in Hebrew, which means of action. So the level of action, bodily action, earth. You might call that Mahastama Prapta. The Bodhisattva says to deal with action. But then you get to the level, and the color of that is red, earth, or yellow. Now the soul level, the level of our soul work, the level of our practice, the level of heart is the level of soul. Here's where all the Dhyani Buddhas, the meditation Buddhas of the Tibetan tradition fit in here on this level. Identified with the deep purple and with the element of water. This is where the great spiritual struggle mainly goes on. This is where our practice takes place. And identified especially on the level of heart. The great Bodhisattva here, the great sponsor of our practice is Avalokiteshvara, the great Bodhisattva of compassion. Now what's interesting here in the Kabbalah, as the divine energy, as it's conceived, comes down to this level of incarnation, if you will, of heart. It's called a Shekinah, which means the taking up residence, the dwelling, the pitching a tent, for shakan in Hebrew, and it's feminine. So on this level, of compassion, of soul work, of heart, you have a lot of feminine energy coming in. And this is really important, as Carl Jung says, not only for our, psychic development, where anima and animus, are unified, It's a major spiritual and psychological challenge. But precisely in the Zen tradition, as you know, Avalokiteshvara becomes, in Chinese and Japanese Zen, a feminine figure. So we have our transgender Bodhisattva to illustrate these truths. So it becomes Kuan Yin in Chinese and Kanzeon in Japanese. So you have this feminine compassionate energy, in both these traditions, reaching down on this level of heart and compassion, where much of the spiritual work takes place, so that we can become truly compassionate beings, symbolized and aided, if you will, by these energy centers, the Bodhisattvas themselves. Now, when you go above that to a lighter color blue, the level of sky, if you will, of air, called Beriya, creation. It's the first spiritual creation level of, if you have body, soul, here you have mind or spirit. So this is a sky level, an air level. And of course the Bodhisattva that would correspond here is Manjusri. Manjusri is the great Bodhisattva of wisdom, of clarity, of illumination. And he has that sword that cuts through error and illusion, so we can see clearly, have an illumined consciousness, with the brightness of the air, the sun. He rides a golden lion, as you know, depicted that way. Golden-haired lion symbolizing, each hair's reflecting every other hair, every bit of reality. It reflects every other bit of reality. That kind of luminous consciousness in which we see everything interrelated. So as our illusions slip away, and our ego slips away, in Beriya, on this third level, we find Manjusri. The fourth level is called Absolute, which means emanation, the one that comes directly, the first emanation from the mystery of the divine, the Absolute there. It's often white color. In Jewish lore, it's above all the angelic powers. It just has the divine name, so it's so close to the Absolute. It just has their names. As I've come to realize in my practice and study, that the Bodhisattva that corresponds here is Samantabhadra, especially prominent in some schools of Tibetan Buddhism. But I remember when I went to China and came to this very famous ancient shrine on the Yangtze River. Their centerpiece there were those two bodhisattvas, Manjusri and Samantabhadra, next to each other. The one on the lion, the other Samantabhadra riding rolling on an elephant, kind of like Ganesh in Hebrew, and in the Hindu tradition, symbolizing where all the animal energy comes up, and is fully united to the divine energy. So. I think you can also draw a correspondence between the kayas, the different levels of Buddha body that you find in the Zen tradition. They're often symbolized in temples themselves, as in Kyoto, where you have the Nirmanakaya, the Buddha body, the Buddha in his life. That's the level of our practice, our human practice, that level of soul that we were talking about. But on the level of spirit and mind, of Manjusri, you would have the Sambhogakaya, this enjoyment body, this luminous body of higher consciousness and integration. And then on this highest level of the Absolute, the emanation would be the Dharmakaya, which is that close to the Absolute. But these are all, it's not the end of the story. Still visualization, there's still enumeration, there's still, it's not the absolute mystery yet. And that's mirrored in the Kabbalah by there are 5 levels of soul that they actually talk about here. The first 4 correspond to what we have here, the nefesh, the body, then the ruach, the spirit, the soul, which is doing its spiritual practice. Then you have the neshama, which is the level of mind. The kaya, which bridges the 4th level, and then the highest is yahida, which means in Hebrew oneness. So oneness, which is higher than everything, higher than any kind of visualization or conceptualization. You could, I just mentioned this in Passion, take the 5 different levels of absolute, a combination of absolute and relative, of Tongshan, those famous 5 levels, and make those correspond to those 5 levels. Relative here, absolute in the relative, relative and absolute here, relative, absolute in the relative, and the absolute all the way up here. But here's where it gets interesting. When you go above all these levels, both traditions say you've got to, well, to use the 99th koan of the Blue Cliff record, you've got to walk on Vairocana's head, which is the highest of the meditation Buddhism. You've got to go beyond all these names, all these visualizations to, what? Well, non-dual to, well, let's look at what the Kabbalah calls it. Beyond all the divine names, even the ones they don't pronounce, beyond all those is, first of all, Ein Sof Or, which means boundless light. And beyond that is Ein Sof, which means boundless. Beyond light or dark, boundless. And beyond that, Ayin, which means nothing. Now, what's more Buddhist than that? The highest name for the highest reality is nothing. Emptiness. What a correspondence. Of course, the Absolute is also called, in Zen lore, vast, boundless light, Ein Sof Or, boundlessness, Ein Sof, but also emptiness. Emptiness, above all. And here's where it also gets interesting in point of view of practice. This can sound very theoretical, but in terms of our practice, this is where it really gets interesting when you see how that emptiness, that nothing, is envisioned, presented, understood, lived by the Kabbalah, the Kabbalists. This emptiness is not just emptiness in terms of you can't conceptualize it, it's empty of all, designation. But it's empty in the sense that it empties itself. It pours itself out. It doesn't cling to anything. It's compassionate. It gives. It empties itself that way. And the word in the Kabbalah that's used for this in Hebrew is tzimtzum, which means the Absolute contracts. It pulls back. It makes space. It doesn't impose itself. It's not big. It's very small, and allows the relative to come forth from that. By emptying itself of itself, it allows the relative to come forth, and that's what's generative. It's a marvelous, marvelous notion and reality when you live it. The way it's understood is that the relative, it's kind of light. The light goes out in shards. The light goes out in the brokenness of the relative, of the reality of our world. So the light from the Absolute is there in the relative, just emptiness is form is emptiness, but it's there in the brokenness. It's hidden there. You have to wake up to it. You have to liberate it. Brokenness, the first noble truth, that it has to be found there. But it is there. It's right there if we just wake up to it. And the famous phrase, which many people know, even who don't know the Kabbalah, Tikkun Olam, which means the reconciliation of the universe, the reconciliation of everything. It's the liberation and bringing back to the oneness, to union, to non-duality of the light that's hidden in creation. The light that's right there if we wake up to it. This is very, very, similar to, any spiritual path. To what Zen sees as the light, which is right there in the middle of everything. One of the authors that deals very well with some of these things is Michael Eigen, who's for 60 years now has here in New York been a psychoanalyst, of Jewish background. This Kabbalah and psychoanalysis. He's quite a mystic. He has books called The Flames from the Unconscious and The Psychoanalytic Mystic. But just what he says here about these things that we've been talking about Tzimtzum, God pulls back and contracts, and I see it as a bow. Bowing, making room for the other. And what do we do all the time when we meet each other? We bow and make room for the other. We pull back. We empty ourselves that the emptiness can be manifest. And what he says very beautifully here on the next page, speaking about the Shekinah. So we're called to repair the rupture wherever we are embedded in the shatter. And you can see how this applies to psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. In the shards, in the brokenness, there are divine sparks awaiting redemption with our help. And we are helped by the divine presence, the Shekinah, this compassionate energy of Avalokiteshvara, which partakes in the dust and ashes of our scarred beings. And he says, this is interesting, one cannot help turning letters around, Hebrews love their alphabet, wondering about scarred, scared, sacred. What's sacred is what's scarred, and scared is where the sacred is hidden. I used to live at the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary, the parish across town here on 33rd Street. How many times we'd get letters addressed to the scared hearts of Jesus and Mary? Freudian slip, maybe. But that's very powerful. It shows what our work is. And he says also, he mentioned Zen a number of times in here, and Buddhism, and he says how the Psalms speak about the mountains dancing and the trees clapping their hands, and how Zen lore, the Zen masters, the ancient Chinese masters speak about the mountains dancing and the trees as well. So it fits very well. Because there's a consciousness that's joy in everything. When you're awake, the mountains are dancing. And you're the mountains that are dancing. You're it. It's reconciliation back to the one. So this is great stuff. And I'll just conclude by pointing out how this fits in with the Easter mystery, which we Christians are also celebrating at this time. Or in fact, the whole mystery as we imagine, as we understand God. The Trinity is Father emptying himself into the Son, and the Holy Spirit is the emptying. It's that non-clinging, it's that compassionate pouring out to allow room for the relative in love and compassion. The creation of the whole world is that. The incarnation is that. The Son pouring himself out into creation, becoming one with it. Emptiness in form is emptiness one in the person of Jesus, as we believe. And the passion is, as Paul says, Christ emptied himself to perform. So in compassion, coming down to make room for the other in that emptiness of the cross. And then finally, the resurrection is that taking up again, the bringing the shards back up to the one, including matter. Let's not leave that out. Zen should be a little clearer on this. If emptiness really is form and form is emptiness, then matter is included in that final resurrection, in that final reconciliation, that final awakening. It's not separate. Nothing is separate. But that's very clearly what we celebrate in the resurrection as well. So let's open ourselves to this. Let's welcome the wisdom. Let's welcome the energy that comes to us. In fact, Kabbalah means welcoming, means receiving, which is what we need to do. We need to receive the wisdom, receive the compassion, and then be vehicles for that as we, like shards, emanate from everything and from us, and we're one with that. So I'll leave that for your